Hello, and welcome to Southern Tier Gardening. My name's Eric. I live in South Georgia, Zone 8B. Today I wanted to talk in a little more detail about growing potatoes. Um, Before I grew potatoes, I always had a lot of questions about specifically what you plant. So I just wanted to kind of show you today what I plant in my garden. What you plant if you're going to grow potatoes is called a seed potato. And all that a seed potato is either a whole potato or a cut up piece of potato. You can plant either or. That's a lot different, obviously, than most plants that you're planting from a seed. Potatoes you actually grow from the potato, and that's called a seed potato. So the first thing you need to do if you're going to grow potatoes is acquire your seed potatoes. One way to do this would be if you planted potatoes the year before, you could save some of your own potatoes throughout the year and replant those the following year. Another option is to buy seed potatoes, and that's what I do. You can find seed potatoes for sale online. You're going to find lots of different varieties. You'll also find seed potatoes for sale at, if you're out in the country, at a feed and seed store. That's where I go. I'm lucky enough to live close by to a really nice feed and seed agricultural supply store. So, the next thing you need to determine is how many seed potatoes you're going to need for your size garden. Now, I plant 4 20-foot rows of potatoes, and I've learned that 5 pounds of seed potatoes, some of them left whole, some of them cut up into pieces, will plant 1 20-foot row. So I planted 20 pounds of seed potatoes. When you get your seed potatoes home, they're literally going to be just bags of small whole potatoes. At that point, you have 2 options. You can either plant the whole potato, or you can cut up your potato into pieces. And I do a little bit of both. So if you plant the whole potato, it's going to produce a lot of sprouts in real close proximity to each other. So planting a whole potato tends to result in lots of potatoes to harvest, but they tend to be smaller, which is one option. The cut pieces of potato have less plants per piece, so there's not as much crowding. So by planting pieces of seed potatoes, the result tends to be less total potatoes, but the potatoes themselves tend to be larger. So that's your 2 options with what you're going to be planting. Now, one thing to consider if you're going to cut up your potatoes is you want to plan ahead. If you've got a weekend set aside where you're planning on planting your potatoes, the week before, that's when you want to actually cut your potatoes. Because what you don't want to do is cut your potato and it'll still be, the water will be there and that cut will be wet. You don't want to take that cut piece of potato and immediately plant it in the ground. That exposed piece is very susceptible to disease, and just like if you cut yourself, the time that wound is exposed, you're susceptible to infection and bacteria. Well, it's the same with that raw cut potato right in the ground. So what you want to do is you want to cut your potatoes a week before, at least 3 or 4 days before, but I like to give it a good week, because what'll happen is that cut piece will heal over and it'll dry out and it'll form a crust. Then when you bury that piece of potato in the ground, there's a lot less risk of the actual potatoes rotting in the ground, which can happen if you just put them right in the ground. So that's something to consider. Something else I wanted to mention, people often ask, well, can I just go to the grocery store and buy a bag of potatoes and plant it, or cut them up and plant them? And yes, you certainly could. I know people, and I've seen people online that talk about doing that and have had success. I choose to buy actual seed potatoes for two main reasons. One is these potatoes have been grown specifically for somebody to plant. So the care that's been given to them and the handling of them, the shipping, is all with the ultimate goal of it being planted. Grocery store potatoes, you're not as sure if the temperatures they've been stored at, where they've been grown. So I like to spend a little bit more money and get seed potatoes. The other reason I like to buy actual seed potatoes is you'll know exactly what variety you're growing. When you go to buy your potatoes, you're going to have the choice of numerous varieties: red potatoes, white potatoes, purple varieties. So, and then when you know exactly what variety you're growing, then you can go and Google your variety and learn some specifics, some things that you need to grow that variety successfully. You'll get all kinds of information on how to grow it. A grocery store potato, you don't really know, exactly what variety it is. So I highly recommend trying to find seed potatoes. So after that week, you've got your potatoes all cut, you're ready to plant. From there, it's really easy. I use my regular garden hoe, and you can see my rows are kind of mounded up, but the first thing you do is you just dig a tunnel or a trench down each row. They call that a furrow, a little trench in the ground. Then you just take your pieces of seed potato and drop them, down in the trench. I space my seed potatoes about 6 inches apart, 6 to 8 inches apart. And also, when you put it in the ground, in the trench, make sure that your eyes, the eyes of the potato, are facing up. That will help the plants grow, because from that eye is where the plant will develop from. Something else I wanted to mention again about cutting your potatoes. When you get your seed potatoes, they have these eyes on them, and that's where the sprouts come out from. So I just wanted to mention, another thing to remember when you cut your potatoes into pieces, make sure that each piece has at least 2 or 3 eyes on it. That way you're assured that you're going to get some plants that come out of there. If you plant a whole potato, you don't have to worry about it. But make sure on your pieces that you've got 2 or 3 eyes on each piece. Also, when you buy seed potatoes, they often will already have these sprouts growing. When you're handling these, be careful. You don't really want to break those off. You want to just be able to, just put that in the ground just like that. So after you've got your trench dug in your row and you lay out all your potatoes, the last thing you do is you just come back over the top. I use a metal tong rake, and you just want to bury them. You just want to pull the soil up over the potatoes, and you can see, hopefully you can see my rows. So that's what this looks like. I planted my potatoes Super Bowl Sunday morning, so they've been in the ground a couple weeks. After you plant them, you want to try to keep the ground as dry as possible until the potatoes start popping up through the soil and the plant starts to grow leaves above the ground. These seed potatoes like it dry. A lot of water, they can rot in the ground. So you can see here, I have not been watering this bed at all. The soil's really dry, and that's what you want. It's been really warm here this week. Today we got up to 85, so it's certainly kept this soil dry. Now next week, it is supposed to get back down to some more normal, cooler temperatures, which is good because these onions do not like 85-degree weather, I'll tell you that. So what I've been doing, if you're growing in an area or a region like mine, and you have these a 2 or 3 day spell of really warm weather and you've got onions planted, what you want to do is just water them a lot. I'm watering these onions 2 or 3 times a day while it's this hot. Then next week when it cools down, I won't have to water as much. But that's a trick to kind of make sure that these plants do okay through this short stretch of really hot weather. So I hope this video was informational. If you've never tried growing potatoes before, I encourage you to give it a try. It's a lot of fun. Last year I planted the same amount of seed potatoes. I planted 20 pounds of potatoes. A 10-pound bag of potatoes was $7 at my feed and seed store. So $14 worth of seed potatoes. My harvest last year was 400 potatoes. I harvest about 100 potatoes out of each of these rows. So it's really worth it. It's a lot of fun. I encourage you to give it a try. So thanks again for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time at Southern Tier Gardening.